Hi, I'm Elisa Morgera, the UN Special Rapporteur on Climate Change and Human Rights. Due to a clash with the thematic ministerial dialogue on biodiversity and climate change, I'm not able to be there with you in person, but I still wish to share my thoughts with you about advancing a human rights-based approach to protecting the marine biodiversity in the light of the advisory opinion of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea on states' obligations on climate change. The tribunal clarified that greenhouse gas emissions and ocean acidification are forms of marine pollution, and states have strict due diligence obligations under the law of the sea, in addition to the obligations they have under the Paris Agreement to take all necessary measures to prevent further and potential pollution from greenhouse gas emissions, as well as reduce and control existing pollution from those emissions from any source, including land-based vessels and aircraft. In addition, the tribunal also took and developed an extensive part of its advisory opinion to clarify state obligations to protect, sustainably use, and restore marine biodiversity, which promote the resilience of living marine resources while enhancing carbon sequestration. So while the tribunal only made a quick reference to the potential relevance of the obligations under the Convention of the Law of the Sea, I think it's very clear how it was able to build on over a decade of normative developments. The CBD parties, as well as indigenous peoples representatives, civil society, and others that contribute to those developments, had clarified in terms of an ecosystem approach to climate mitigation and adaptation with a specific focus on marine biodiversity. It's important, therefore, in advancing the understanding of the relevance of the obligations and guidance under the CBD on marine biodiversity to look at state obligations that are of a strict due diligence nature to establish national frameworks, as well as administrative procedures and enforcement mechanisms, as well as ensure adequate vigilance to prevent, reduce, and control climate change, as well as preventing transboundary harm. And this includes international cooperation in various international organizations, such as the CBD, but also other fora which may not necessarily have a law of the sea mandate. Now, this decision is crucial also for the protection of human rights. The International Tribunal itself recognized that climate change raises human rights concerns, and therefore, through that indirect reference, underscore the relevance of the whole of the advisory opinion, including the section on marine biodiversity for human rights. But we also have to notice that two judges separately confirmed that international human rights law obligations are applicable to protection of the marine environment from climate change, particularly in terms of preventing disproportionate impacts on those that find themselves in vulnerable situations, including in small island developing states. In my own report, first report to the Human Rights Council, I underscored that all obligations outlined by the International Tribunal are crucial to protect human rights and should in turn be interpreted in accordance with relevant human rights obligations. This is particularly relevant, for instance, in relation to environmental impact assessments. The tribunal indicated how important environmental impact assessments are for the prevention and mitigation of climate change, and also for ensuring that we protect and restore marine biodiversity, contributing to climate mitigation and adaptation. And the tribunal made a reference as to how these environmental impact assessments need to consider also socioeconomic impacts, applying the precautionary and ecosystem approach. And we have a long history and important guidelines developed under the Convention on Biological Diversity that can contribute to that holistic understanding of ecosystems, the interactions between marine biodiversity and climate change, and also the protection of human rights of indigenous peoples and other communities who are particularly connected to the ocean or particularly impacted by climate change. This clarification by the International Tribunal is also important for the future implementation of the 2023 Agreement on the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Marine Biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, where again we have innovative provisions on environmental impact assessment and strategic environmental assessments that should be carried out, taking into account the conservation of the carbon cycling services of ocean ecosystems. There are other important points in the advisory opinion that are relevant for the CBD, including in relation to access to information, and very much showing the need to connect climate change information with marine biodiversity information and sciences as a way to really understand how human rights may be and are being impacted by climate change, and how we can also protect those human rights through the ecosystem-based approach. The tribunal particularly clarified how states have obligations to observe, measure, evaluate, and analyze the risks or effects of climate change on the marine environment, and also keep continuing surveillance of the effects of those activities causing climate change and making impacts on the ocean, and publish those results, which in my second report of this year to the UN General Assembly, I have stressed how important access to information is for everyone to really understand the full extent of the risks we are all facing, and certain human rights holders are facing, particularly in the face of climate change, and how this evidence needs to be used by decision makers to prevent all foreseeable negative impacts on human rights arising from climate change and from climate change response measures. Finally, I just would like to bring to your attention the clarifications from the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea in relation to marine geoengineering, which is an issue that has been for over a decade also addressed under the Convention on Biological Diversity. The tribunal clarified that marine geoengineering is contrary to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea when it transforms one type of pollution into another, and when is incompatible with the obligation to take all necessary measures to prevent, reduce, and control marine pollution resulting from the use of technologies under state jurisdiction or control. And again, in my first report to the Human Rights Council, I have also clarified that my reading of the advisory opinion of the tribunal is that geoengineering should also be considered unlawful under the law of the sea when it is incompatible with states' obligations to protect marine biodiversity and restore ecosystems for the purposes of climate change mitigation and adaptation, which are essential for the protection of human rights, including everyone's human right to a healthy environment. I look forward to hearing how the rest of the deliberations go and to continue this important conversation.